meetings go way back to pizza parlors, chatting about GIS over some dinner, and so we've kind of now morphed these into this latest series.
Charles Shoemaker here. I was looking at the list of attendees here. Most folks know I do see some new names that I'm not familiar with, but I'm a GIS professional here in the Reading area. I've been here for quite a while, a little over 2 decades. I work full time as a GIS person during the day at Stantec, and I also have a side gig, if you will, in GIS in the way of GIS education, where Dan mentioned Shasta College and the Geospatial Technologies program here in Reading. I also teach with Dan out there. Our guest tonight is Sarah Troedson. She's on the line right now. She is also a GIS pro with Stantec. Sarah and I do not work together right in Reading. Sarah is in a different office. She is in California though, but that office is located in Southern California. So she has agreed to come here tonight and serve as the person that we're going to interview for this month's series, and we're going to take it from there. So Sarah, with that said, would you, first of all, thank you so much for being so kind to be here with us tonight. And if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then, how did you get into GIS, that sort of thing? Go from day one as far back as you can remember and take us all the way to now.
Oh, day one is fun. I'll start with now and then go backwards.
Okay.
Back to the beginning. I've been with Stantec, working around Charles, but not very often together. Hopefully we'll change that soon. But we're on weekly calls and he's delightful. So you all are lucky to have him. I've been with Stantec 2.5 years almost. And before that, I was in Sacramento and working for GEI consultants. And I've been doing GIS now for 23 years. I got my master's degree from Penn State's online program. Anybody who wants to look into that, I will highly recommend it. It's a fantastic program. And I did my bachelor's degree in geology. So geology has colored my entire path into GIS, which I'm sure I'll get a chance to talk about more later. And yeah, so I lived in Sacramento until about 3 years ago. Moved down to SoCal because my spouse got a job in Orange County. And I spent 6 frantic months unemployed trying to find something down here. And I'm very happy I landed with Stantec. How I got into GIS is actually one of my favorite stories to tell, which is probably the whole reason that I accepted Charles' request. When I was a senior in high school, I had a free period and start earning money, because who didn't when they were 17 and a half. And the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services had a student position open. I had no idea what I'd be doing. And I get there and it's ArcView either 2.3 or 3.1. I don't even remember anymore. And I was drawing little tiny boxes on the map and then putting into the table the name of the farm, the owner of the farm, the address, which crops were grown there and what season they harvested it. And the whole point of that exercise was that all these farms were near the San Onofre nuclear power plant. And so that if there was a plume out of San Onofre, they could then search the data and see which crops would be affected. And I just thought this was the coolest thing in the entire world. I want to do more of this. This is awesome. Show me more. So I graduated high school and was told that I couldn't stay in that position anymore, even for the summer, because it was classified for a high school student. Gotta love state service. So I asked my mother, the research librarian, hey, Mom, who else does GIS? Where can I do this? And she ended up connecting me to what used to be the Division of Mines and Geology and is now the California Geological Survey. And I got a job with them in October of my freshman year in college. And I worked for them for my entire undergrad in geology. In fact, I'd been collecting pretty rocks since I was 8, 6, something like that. But I didn't go into geology because, oh no, then I'd have to work in oil. I don't want to work in oil. I want to save the planet. I was totally an environmentalist tree hugger at 7. It was awesome. And so suddenly I'm working in an office where there's geologists who don't work for oil. I'm like, oh, I can do geology. So I changed my major. But the whole time that I was working on my bachelor's degree, I was working for CGS, digitizing geologic maps. And I have a couple of pictures about how we used to do that because it's funny. And if I can figure out the whole share my screen thing, that is not the screen I wanted it to share on.
I think down in the bottom center, do you see a button down there you can click on for share screen?
Well, it wasn't that. It's the problem that when I clicked on PowerPoint to show me the display, it blacked out all three of my screens.
Oh, okay.
Which, like PowerPoint, that's not what I want.
PowerPoint does that. Yeah.
All right, so bottom corner of Zoom, I have buttons and I can say, I am not seeing share a screen. View, no.
Devin, do you have to give her a control or anything? Do you know?
I was looking at that, Charles, and
I may not have the option.
let's see, one participant. Share.
Oh, hey, share screen, there it is.
You get it? Okay.
I did, and let's see if I can make PowerPoint behave. We'll see if we can share screen too.
Yep, there you go.
Yeah.
All right.
PowerPoint behave because it wants to shift it to my other screen.
Uh-huh.
I can at least show you the picture in PowerPoint of sitting at a plane table with this mouse that we called a puck. There's a copper coil here and there's a big old fancy, super precise target in the middle. And what you don't see behind me over here is a machine running ArcInfo, and everything was command line.
Uh-huh.
I was very briefly fluent in ArcAML and command line Unix. So this is back in 97 to 2002-ish. I don't think we have plain tables anymore anywhere. If we want to digitize something, we scan it and we do it on screen. Have to trace it with a puck and reference the corners so that it knows which USGS quad you were on. But way back in the day, this is the thing, one of the things that we did, and it was a lot of fun. As you can see, I had my headphones and like, don't bother me, just let me click my lines. It was a great job for a student. I don't know if I have anything else of interest to share screen wise. But that's where I started. So I did 5 years doing my bachelor's in geology and 5 years of digitizing geologic maps. And I will say that digitizing geologic maps gave me a really, really good foundation for GIS. I don't think you have to come into GIS from another discipline, but I think it can serve you well because it gives you context for all of that data you're going to end up using. And if you don't come into GIS from another discipline, you get work experience in the discipline you need, and you start learning the vocabulary of your other disciplines and things like that. And it helps you on your way.
I remember way back when I left Kentucky after earning my bachelor's degree and then moved to California for good. I've been here ever since. Came to the Reading area. That was in the summer of 1999. And I quickly became acquainted with Dan, who's on the call here out at Shasta College. And I remember I launched right into the GIS program out there, having finished a wildlife bachelor's. And we had a digitizing table with the puck and all that. And we were exposed to that out there as well.
Yeah.
And it's cool,
Nice.
Really cool technology. Yeah. Nowadays they do it. It's all what they call heads up digitizing. Huh?
That's why it's heads up, because instead of looking away at the plane table, you're looking up at your screen.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Yep.
So if anyone heard that term, wondered where it came from, that's it.
Yeah. So
yeah, I'm a dinosaur.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of us here, I think, are. Yeah. Hey. With respect to geospatial and GIS at Stantec, can you give us an idea of how are you using GIS at Stantec or anything
Absolutely.
geospatial?
I almost never get to do geologic maps anymore, although I do have one assignment this week, fortunately. And the most of my work is environmental services, which means everything from they got to do phase 1, phase 2 environmental cleanup at a site where they used to do like gold plating or who knows what, and there's all kinds of crap in the ground and they need to figure out where it is and how to clean it up. So we map that. Or things like I'm working on a chunk of the high-speed rail project, CP4, construction package 4 of the Fresno to Bakersfield portion of the train is my project, my baby. That's what I was actually officially hired to do at Stantec, but it didn't take me long to say, okay, I got this. Now what else can I do? So, for that project, it's all pre-construction environmental clearance. It's okay, are there small mammals out here? Are there rare plants? If there's small mammals, are they the kind we have to trap and release? Or are they the kind that we kind of observe burrows and then dig them out and hope we don't kill too many critters and hope they're smart enough to run away from the bulldozer? And a lot of, okay, how much wetlands are we going through? How are we mitigating for that? The work for not high-speed rail, I do a lot of wetland delineation work where the biologist goes out in the field with the collector map that I set up for them. They come back and we go over how to make field data pretty, because field data is almost never pretty to begin with, especially if you're trying to walk a wetland feature. If you need to calc impacts, you can't have gaps between this type of wetland and that type of wetland. So there's a lot of data cleanup in that. What other environmental stuff? Oh, bird nests on the high-speed rail. Every week there's new bird nests this time of year, and every single one of them gets a offer of avoidance so that we can let the birds fledge and fly away before construction continues.
Mm-hmm.
So,
you mentioned Esri or collector anyway, so that's Esri. What about technology in the way of GIS software and that? What are you into?
Everything that I'm doing right now is either ArcMap Desktop or ArcGIS Pro. Most of what I do is still desktop. I'm a little bit slow to adopt Pro, which I'm working on. There are things Pro does brilliantly better and things it just doesn't yet. Being a geologist originally, I have a really, really strong affinity for pretty maps, and Pro is not quite as good at making pretty maps yet. So I still do most of my map production in desktop, but geoprocessing is smarter in Pro, publishing to Collector and ArcGIS Online is smarter in Pro, pulling the data down from that is smarter in Pro. So I'm forcing myself to learn Pro, and it is serving me, but it's hard. After 20 years, basically, of using the same software, learning a different interface is quite the hurdle, but it's worth it. Mm-hmm. And besides, that way I never stop learning.
How about outside GIS? Do you use any other technology on your project workflow or anything that's not necessarily GIS direct?
You'd be surprised how much I use Excel. I pull data in from Google Earth. I spit data back out to Google Earth because there's still a lot of people who can't interface directly with Esri tools. We don't necessarily have like an internal enterprise server where we can do the equivalent of Google Earth for our project managers. I mean, Stantec is working on that within environmental services, but it's not going to be ready for a while. So most PMs, they want to see their data. You got to send it to them into KNZ. So there's a lot of going back and forth between those data types. I don't use CAD. I pull a lot of CAD data into GIS. High-speed rail, all the design work's done in MicroStation. So I'm pulling CGNs in. For other projects, it's done in CAD and it's DWGs or DXFs. So lots of data conversions. Data conversions has been a fantastic toolkit for me. That's something that I encourage everybody to get practice with. Learning how GIS reads CAD and how CAD reads GIS is useful. But yeah, Excel and CAD and Google Earth.
Cool. How about you mentioned Arc Pro versus Arc Map, and we know, I think most of us on here know that Pro is not new per se, but it's certainly newer than Arc Map, right? Yeah. Well, it's Stantec and in your workflow and all that, and with the folks that you work with, how do you stay on top of things like that? What do you do in the way of learning and further education and that sort of thing?
That's a good question. There's a couple of ways to do that. One of them is the Esri conference and the free training available through Esri. If you already have Esri software, there's a whole bunch of free stuff you're automatically able to access. Within Stantec, because we have an enterprise license with Esri, we have additional training resources. So there's get familiar with Pro classes that I can take. Most of what I've learned about Pro has been a combination of sitting in technical sessions at the Esri conventions. Not that I could go last year. Nobody could. It was all online, and then I was busy working. But that's a very good resource. A A lot of what I've learned about Google Earth, I actually got at the NACIS conference because there's a lot more people there using non-Esri tools. That's the North American Cartographic Information Society, which is my current membership of choice. I need to join ERISA, but I haven't yet as far as professional organizations go. But the NACIS conferences are smaller. They're like 300 people compared to Esri's 15,000. And so you learn, you get to know people better. Please join Cal ERISA. I just realized, hey, there's messages in the chat.
You want to take a break and address some of those? We got questions coming in.
See, backtracking a little bit to the gaps between ecological zones. There can be. It depends on what you're doing. If you're trying to say, here's riverine, and on either side of riverine is valley riparian, you don't want any gaps in the data between those, and you don't want them to overlap because you don't want to double count anything in your impact calculations, and you don't want to leave anything out because somebody's going to check your work at some point, and or I just know that I want it to be right. So making sure that things are actually perfectly snapped and perfectly tiled is called topology. And so I do quite a bit with topology and making sure my data actually is seamless and has no gaps and holes, which I learned from doing geologic mapping. Oh, see, student passes as your conference. I highly recommend it. Take them. Go. They're awesome. The other projects besides high-speed rail, I'm on, how many Caltrans projects do we have? 6? I think
a lot. Yeah.
6 different task orders. And those are everything from putting in the carpool lane on the YOLO bypass to replacing culverts up in Humboldt County to on highway, what is it, 254, I think is the one I was just doing. That one was a bear. So Caltrans was supposed to give us data and they didn't give us KMZ. They gave me a table in Word with coordinates in lat long with only 5 decimal places. Now, if you've done anything with lat long coordinates, you know you need at least 6 to get it really accurate. So I converted it to Excel so that I could drop it into ARC and plot the coordinates, dimensioned Excel. And then I got the post mile file from ArcGIS Online because Caltrans District 1 has posted that, has shared that online. And then I started connecting the dots and comparing like, okay, my dot's over here, your dot's over there, let's move it. But then they wanted the environmental study limits boundary, the ESL, to be a 25-foot buffer off the culvert. So they wanted me to draw a line for every culvert, and not just have the dot at the post mile. And you can't even see some of these culverts. There's complete tree coverage on that highway. So I talked with the project biologist a bit and did what I could, and we made do. And then we sent the data to Caltrans for them to review, and I haven't heard back. So that's one of the projects that's not high-speed rail.
Uh-huh. Hey, one of the other questions that I have on my list here that I was going to ask, and I think that's already been answered. I think I was going to say, is your workload mainly focused on Southern California? But you just mentioned Humboldt County, so we know you're all over California. Yeah. How about anything outside California, or do you go?
I've got some Hawaii projects. I'm delighted with my Hawaii projects. Time they want to send me out there, that'd be even better. But no, they don't. It's expensive to fly people to Hawaii for work, especially when we can do most GIS remotely. I interned in Hawaii at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. So I mentioned the bachelor's degree in geology. I tried to do a master's in volcanology because volcanoes are awesome. And I wanted to combine GIS and volcanology. And my advisor at the time had no idea how to help me do that. And I was just floundering. So I ended up going to the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory for 4 months to collect data on the natural levees that the Mauna Loa lava flows have created. And while I was there, I digitized the state of Hawaii digital geologic map. I'm the 4th author, or 3rd author, because that was more fun. I theoretically collected data for my master's thesis that I never finished, but yeah, I ended up doing mapping even then. So I think GIS is in my bones.
Mm-hmm.
But as a result, I really am fond of Hawaii. And after living on the Big Island for 4 months, getting a chance to do mapping in the Alawai watershed on Oahu was fantastic. I couldn't turn it down.
Mm-hmm. Now you mentioned GIS and remote in the same sentence a few minutes ago. So the next question I have on the list is, yeah. What does GIS life at Stantec look like for you these days? Maybe before the pandemic, and now keeping in mind with the pandemic. What does it look like? How do you do GIS remotely?
Pretty darn well. So before the pandemic, because I was hired on the high-speed rail project initially, I was living in Orange County, and so the nearest Stantec office was Irvine, but the CP4 high-speed rail project was being run out of Bakersfield office. So I commuted to Bakersfield. I talked Stantec into hiring me and paying for my hotel. So I drove up there on Sunday night, spent 2 or 3 days working there, drove back, worked out of the Irvine office the rest of the time, mostly so that I could build that interpersonal relationship. As a new employee, they needed to know they could trust me. They needed to know I was competent. I needed to get to know the alignment. I did get a couple of tours up and down the 22-mile stretch that we're working on with the construction lead and the project biologist. And that helps because there's only so much you can get off of an aerial photo. It really does help if you can to see your work location in person, actually in the field. We'd almost never get the chance, but if you get it, it helps. So I used to drive to Bakersfield every week. I had dropped down to every other week, maybe every 3 weeks right before the pandemic hit. And I was actually in Bakersfield the day that they shut down the Bakersfield office for COVID. On my drive home, I got a call from one of our regional coordinators, Mike Weber, saying, "Don't go back into Irvine tomorrow, stay home." So it was a few weeks of scrambling. I had my laptop with me so I could work, but working on a laptop screen on GIS is not ideal. I see nods and smiles, so And it took me a little while, but I eventually got, if I ever get any, I just saw the comment about District 2 culvert inventory. Thank you. I will keep that in mind. If they make me do culverts in District 2, I know I have good data. So I had my laptop and I worked from home on just my laptop screen for about a month before things were cleared up enough that I could, mask up, make an appointment, and go into the Irvine office and get my monitors. So I've got 2 monitors and my laptop. If I could have a wall of monitors, I would totally do it. There's never enough screen real estate. And I've been working from home ever since. There are definitely challenges with the connection. Connecting to the Stantec servers, we have to do through a VPN because security. And when you're not sitting on top of one of those servers in the building, connecting to it is very, very slow. The fastest connection I have is actually to our virtualized Citrix server. So I've been doing my work almost exclusively on Citrix pretty much for the last year and a quarter. And the only time that changes, we had a project that I was helping out the Thousand Oaks office on, and I talked them into letting me borrow one of their extra desktops that they use for modeling so that I could remote connect to that desktop and be sitting next to the server. And that helped a lot. And then the modelers needed their computer back. And I'm like, okay, I'm moving the data to Citrix. So most of my work is on Citrix. I have lots of conference calls. I think I supervise 2 staff, and I'm on the phone with each of them for at least a half an hour every single day, sometimes sharing screens, sometimes just chatting and keeping up. So there's definitely a lot more virtual communication time with the whole virtual work. But as far as affecting my workflow, once I got it down, it's fine. You really can do it remote as long as you've got the network infrastructure there.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard from a lot of people that, over the past year doing this remote thing is a lot of folks are finding out that, like you just mentioned, it can be done. In many cases, it can be done well too. So, it's going to be interesting to see how things play out over time. I know that it's kind of like with the coronavirus and the pandemic, we're on the downhill slide now, but I think some things are here to stay, but Hey, speaking of that, so now on my list of questions, all the easy ones are done. Here come the hard ones. All right.
Woohoo! Lay 'em on me.
Yeah. So you mentioned you've been into GIS for quite a while, over 2 decades now. So thinking back from the beginning, and then those pictures that you showed us, and way back in the beginning, and how you got to where you are now. Well, what have you seen that's changed, like really big changes from then to now, and then along with that, what do you see coming? And I know on the call right now, like Dan mentioned, there are quite a few students on here. So we have folks that are either getting into their career now, at the start, or they're up and coming, or we may have some folks on the call right now that are looking to do different, a different career path, or maybe combine GIS with what they've already been into and what they have a background in. And just looking out long term, say 5-10 years, that sort of thing, or maybe even longer. What do you see after having done this for so long? What do you see coming?
The main thing that's changed on the surface is the processing power. Digitizing the maps on the plane table and processing it in a Unix machine. I'd wait a day for it to convert lines to polygons. Okay, not a day, but one map took a day. So the ability to do more, the whole big data phrase doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense unless you have the context for what it didn't used to be. So you can handle processing the whole of California's roadway data at once and not have to wait terribly long. So we can do a lot more with spatial analysis when we can access larger data sets or more detailed data sets. It might not be a very large area, but super detailed. That still takes a lot of processing power, and we have that now. So the long-term trend that I've seen is, whether I like it or not, the software is going to change. The tools change. The foundation behind that is thinking spatially, learning what you can and can't do with data, both from the physical processing side of things and the does it even make sense from the spatial analysis side of things. And if you've got that foundation in thinking spatially and getting that, how does data go together? How does it overlay? How can it interact? That all transcends the changes in software. And having that foundation will serve you all the way through, no matter what changes that come. The other thing that I've noticed is that even though it's really, really easy to make maps, it's not as easy to make really good maps. I did mention that pretty maps is one of my favorite things. And what that ties into is knowing how to present information so that it's not just data, but information. And that skill also transcends software. So while the technology will shift, thinking about your audience and how they're going to read or view whatever it is you're making is a long-term skill and something that will continue to serve. The trends that I see changing are, we're probably going to get even better mobile GPS type data collection. We're probably going to get better real-time data tools and fancier interfaces for those tools. I mean, Esri dashboards are a relatively new thing, but they've been anticipated in like the emergency services industry for a decade. So yeah, I don't know what to say about how I think the technology is going to change. I'm certain it will. And
Yeah.
as long as you can get past the hurdle of learning the interface, it's going to be awesome.
Some of that, I remember back in last summer, with the pandemic, it was the first time, I think, in history that with Esri in the user conference, it was wide open. You could be anywhere, and as long as you had the computer and the internet connection, anyone could go. Yeah. And I had not been in a long time, and I did attend a fair amount of that last summer. And I remember it seems like every time that I do something with Esri or attend a conference or a training or whatnot, there are always new terms that are thrown out there. They're always on top of things really big in the way of technology. I remember hearing things like big data and digital twins and what are some others, artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things, which was sort of new to me then, even just 6 months ago. Well, what are your thoughts on all that kind of stuff and how that's like changing the landscape, the digital landscape and the technology and that sort of thing?
Big data for me is, as I already mentioned, the most accessible of those terms for me, because It's just more of what we already do. And the fact that we can actually process it now instead of, letting your computer run for a week and coming back to it. The artificial intelligence stuff, the computer learning stuff has some really big potential. There's a lot that can be done with automatically interpreting imagery that I'm pretty excited about how that's going to go. And I expect some major strides in that realm as well. I don't know very much about the whole Internet of Things. Like, I've heard the term, but I couldn't necessarily define it if you asked me to.
I actually looked it up right before this meeting.
Good, you tell us.
Yeah, I was curious what it was too. Yeah, but basically it's smart sensors. From what I read, smart sensors embedded into devices and technology that can connect to one another, that type of thing. And apparently Esri is really big. Yeah, Esri is really big into that in the way of, think locational based services and that kind of thing, and
that makes sense.
Navigating and all that. Yeah, so I remember Jack last summer mentioned that, and he had quite a bit to say about it. So yeah,
it wasn't covered under that term, but when I did my master's degree, I specifically made a point of taking the ethics and professionalism class, which highly recommended to everybody. If you have an opportunity to take one, do. It covers a lot of what we should and shouldn't do with data just because we can. And one of the case studies we had was cell phone location data. And what's a responsible use of that? How is it okay to pull that information when people may or may not have given consent to it? You use it voluntarily, give it. Now we all sign these little user agreements that we don't actually read for our technology and our phones and our devices. And sometimes those permission for people to use your locational data is embedded in that. But when I took my ethics class, it was not common practice to embed that kind of permission in the user agreement. There was a lot of questions about whether or not it was ethical to use the cell phone location data for fill in the blank thing. So yeah, I wouldn't have called it that. I didn't know of it as the Internet of Things, but it absolutely makes sense. There's casinos that put the RFID chip in the little frequent user card. And when you walk on to their campus, they know when you're in the parking lot if you're one of their important high roller customers, and they know when you hit the door and there's someone there to greet you. That's all done with location technology. Mm-hmm. So that's another application of that Internet of Things.
That's another thing I remember Jack Dangerman talking about last summer at the UC was the whole trend of GIS going indoors. Yeah, and I've heard about that from a few folks here at Stantec myself, and the DTI. DTI here at Stantec they refer to as digital technology and innovation, I believe it is. Yep. What have you heard about that? Can you?
I haven't gotten
GIS to work indoors.
I haven't gotten to work very much with the indoor folks. I've talked with our guy who does the 3D scans of landslide maps, landslide hills, and makes the maps. Places where landslides have happened, and can predict whether or not there's going to be more of them based on slope stability and prior movement and all this stuff from these fancy 3D survey model things that he takes. They're basically 3D scans, but he has a lot of awesome processing algorithms and can spit out some pretty cool stuff. We were going to use it on a gas pipeline relocation project that got tabled because last summer gas prices went down, and the gas company couldn't afford the project. So that project is going to be later. But yeah, I haven't gotten to work with the folks doing it indoor, but I know that the team that does a lot of the phase 1, phase 2 environmental cleanup type reporting is eager to use that, because sometimes that's all you've got is, okay, I'm standing in the middle of a building. I can't get a GPS signal, and it's a lead walled building because they were doing radioactive stuff in here or whatever. Mm-hmm. And right here is where the drain is, and over here is where the tank was, and being able to scan that stuff would be great. And I'm sure that technology will be coming along in the future.
Mm-hmm. Hey, I want to ask you a few questions about GIS education. You've mentioned up to this point, coursework that you've taken, and you mentioned in your intro Penn State, and I know that Penn State offers a graduate program, and you did that, I know. GIS direct education, and being the educational side of me and knowing that we have students and folks who are learning GIS here in the local area with that Penn State degree. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, that was entirely online. right?
Entirely.
Yeah.
I went there for graduation.
Yeah. What was that like in general? What are your thoughts on GIS education and especially GIS education online these days?
I think GIS education is essential to being a practicing geospatial professional. Even if you learn a lot of it on the job, getting classes will fill in gaps you didn't know you had. I mean, starting in geology and going into GIS, I took my first GIS class when I was working on that failed master's degree in volcanology. And then I went back 4 or 5 years later and got my MGIS from Penn State. I probably could have tested out of their first level geology 101 or geography 101. And I didn't, and I'm really glad. Yeah, about half the class was repeats, but the other half was, I should know this. I've been doing this professionally for 5 years, and yet I'd never had it explained that way, or I'd never thought of it that way, or I only got pieces of it. Having formal education in GIS, I think, is fantastic. And, you don't necessarily need a master's degree. Having the certification program from American River College, I know, is fantastic because one of my employees I hired out of that program. I've heard very good things about the program at Shasta College. So I think that's a great thing and everybody should do it. Doing it online really worked out surprisingly well. I was really pleased with it. The Penn State program specifically is designed for working professionals. So you take only 1 or 2 classes at a time, and you're supposed to be doing the work in your weekends and your evenings, and they know you have a job, or they hope you have a job. And so it's not a huge load. But it's also immediately reinforcing. Like, I would do my homework, and then the next day at work, I could apply it. Nothing makes you learn it better than that. That was phenomenal. That's one of the reasons I think the Penn State program is so good.
Uh-huh.
I also am still quite good friends with my advisor, and he promised me if I ever wanted a PhD, as long as I was willing to move to State College, he had a spot for me. I'm like, love you, but no, not moving to State College.
Hey, Sarah, GIS education. So doing the education that you've done, and you went down the same type of road that I did. I think I had mentioned in this conversation early on that I did the wildlife thing. So a bachelor's in wildlife, and then a graduate degree directly in GIS. And you mentioned you did the geology and then GIS graduate and all that. Have you found in general that was beneficial to you in your career, professional life, and has it been beneficial to you in GIS overall, and also at Stantec? Have you been able to really use that?
Yes. One of my frustrations at my prior job was that I had this awesome master's degree and couldn't use it. And that wasn't entirely true, because I did use some of it, but I feel like I'm using all my skills here, just about. And that's a pretty awesome thing about Stantec. GIS can be applied to so many different industries. You can apply it to marketing, you can apply it to environmental, you can apply it to geology, you can apply it to medical. The best dashboard for the COVID outbreak is a GIS dashboard. So, there's having that foundation in another subject served me really, really well, but the formal education has been essential too. And if you come at it the other way around, you get the good foundation in GIS first. You just have to recognize you're going to have a vocabulary learning curve on whatever profession you end up using that GIS for. And having switched from, I did geology, then I did water resources and groundwater, which at least overlapped with geology a bit. And then I did the environmental shift. It was a rough 6 months learning the vocabulary I needed to do environmental GIS. I had all the GIS skills, but I didn't necessarily know what they meant when they asked for a wetland delineation. I didn't know what they meant when they asked for, the cultural resources stuff. What's an isolate? So, there's a vocabulary that goes with all of the different ways that you can apply GIS, and that can be learned. Having the formal GIS skills, the formal education behind that, knowing how to think spatially is like, golden key. And the rest can be added. And, if you find you really, really love a piece of it, take a couple classes in environmental studies or biology or geology or whatever. That has helped too.
have you found that picking that stuff up, basically being exposed to a wide array of topics within or under, the umbrella of environmental science here at Stantec, have you found that it's been in general pretty easy to cross-pollinate, you might say, with a central focus on GIS?
Yes, it does help a lot. The more applications of GIS and the wider your vocabulary is for how to apply GIS makes it easier. It was really funny because I got hired at Stantec to do specifically environmental GIS, and that was only the last 3 years of my career up to that point, because I'd been doing water resources and geology and planning. So yeah, the skills transfer. You just need the vocabulary, and having the broader vocabulary helps a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
And in your education, did you find or do you believe that, one side of GIS education was maybe more beneficial to what you do in the workplace here at Stantec from a theoretical standpoint versus a practical standpoint, or are they about equal, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think it just depends on where you end up. Like for me, most of what I do is still basically mapping and chunks of spatial analysis. I'm not doing fancy statistical spatial analysis, though I did have a class in it. It was actually my hardest class of my master's degree, because I didn't do statistics as an undergrad in geology. So I had to learn statistics and spatial statistics. But specifically for what I do, having the vocabulary to explain, the paleontologist wants a geologic map, I can do that. Paleo is considered agricultural, which is part of environmental sciences and environmental services, but it's still going back to my roots in another field that helps. The stuff that we're doing for LADWP on mapping the health of their river channels, because it's all concrete. My water resources background serves me there. So I guess I'd say it's much more of the applied and less of the theoretical. Not that the theoretical side of it's not interesting. I mean, my master's project was specifically on getting a unified symbology set for emergency response, because that would be helpful if we had a standard across the world, but we don't. So, I mean, they're both useful, and everything that you can do to broaden that vocabulary and see all the different ways that GIS can be used helps.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Yeah. Hey, with respect to early career GIS folks, folks here on the call, maybe folks that are just starting out, or like I mentioned, folks that could be, they have a different background now, they're wanting to do GIS as a career switch, or maybe combine it with something else. Do you have any words of wisdom for them for career development?
Awesome.
Any things to look out for or anything?
I feel like I've kind of said most of that already. Having a cross-discipline training that's not GIS is helpful. Having a science background teaches you how to think in a way that just a straight geography, social science might not teach you, depending on which classes you take. Having the social sciences that you get from geography may teach you much better what you need to do marketing. Having a PR background to do the marketing GIS is going to help you. So if, changing careers, don't let that stop you. That is a good thing to do. And you can apply what you already know to where you're going. And if you're like in GIS because it's awesome and you don't know what kind of GIS you want to do yet, that's okay. Go to the Esri conferences, go to meetings like this and see what's out there and see what interests you and go after that. If you think that the environmental part of GIS looks really amazing, take an environmental studies class and see if you like it. It's an easy thing to just take one little night class and see how that fits in with your interests. Mm-hmm. The extra vocabulary helps.
Mm-hmm. I have one final question I want to ask you. This might be the toughest one of all. I don't know, but you know, we've worked together for a while now. It's been a few years, and I know that we've been in different meetings here at Stantec, and we've talked GIS to a large degree and whatnot. And I've sort of been exposed to you, and down there in Southern California, you've been exposed to me up here in Northern California. You've learned a little bit about us over time, especially through this meeting here and leading up to this meeting. Here in Northern California, we have a lot of entities in the way of private consulting firms. We have city, we have county government. We have a lot of folks here on this call who are into all those different types of organizations using GIS to serve the local community. And in general, when you think about California, here in Redding, Shasta County, we're a lot more rural than say Southern California, for example. In the time that you've been down there in Southern California and comparing it with what you know and what you've learned about us up here, what are your thoughts on GIS down there? I mean, is it different or is it similar, or what do you think?
It's really similar. There's less open space. I mean, it's funny because my first project since working down here was the high-speed rail project, and that was really about plowing a rail line through open space, farmland mostly, and a little bit of the city of Wasco, if you can. It's a very small city. But the projects that I've done outside of that are in SoCal, I mean, you look for a sensitive species listing from CNDDB and you're all surprised that there even are any, because it's all urban. And the number of agencies you might have to coordinate with is at least as high as doing stuff in the Sacramento area, if not worse. There's 104 cities in LA County alone or something like that. So if you're crossing city boundaries, it's any reasonably sized project has the potential to cross city boundaries and deal with more than one agency there. So the regulatory permitting side of it, I think, is almost harder down here. Although up in Northern California, there's more open space to protect, which also makes the permitting part a bit harder. So apples and oranges.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of it's similar, but there's definitely there's always regional challenges when you're working in a different geography. I mean, the stuff I've done in Hawaii is completely different. They don't even call them parcels. They don't even call them tax lots. I forget what they call them. It was some weird term and I didn't know what it was. It took me a while to realize, oh, that's their parcel data set.
Wow. Yeah, I guess can be quite different. It's still all GIS to some degree, and the technology, the way we know it, but you go to different geographies, like you say, it could be an entirely different way of thinking about it. Maybe I imagine it's that way probably back east to some degree. But yeah.
I got to do a project in Ghana once, and apart from the fact that the roads were not paved and so looked different on the aerial, the number one thing about it was the client telling me that they wanted the thing red. And most North Americans have a thing where red is bad. It's a cultural thing. America, maybe not as much as Canada, has, you worry about that when you're making a map. People are going to assume, oh, it's red, it's bad. That was not a problem for the Ghana maps. Like, no, that's what we want. It stands out and it's pretty. Like, I love you. So yeah, even mapping different, that's back to the keep your end user in mind, but still fun anecdote.
Yeah. I think Dan posted a question in there. Did you, in the chat?
Options for folks pursuing GIS who might not be considered inclined to be a computer wizard. Heck yeah. I'll use myself as an example and then go out from there. A lot can be done with automating GIS if you know how to script or code. I do not. I am not good at Python. I'm not good at Visual Basic, which frankly isn't even being used anymore. And learning how to write a label expression in Arcade took me like an hour. So you don't have to be what you might think of as a computer wizard to do good GIS. It's about learning what can be done, and the people who can do it, you let them. I hired my favorite Python programmer to automate stuff for me. I mean, I talked management into it, but yes. So I'm not that kind of computer whiz. the thing that I'm best at that I don't actually think of as a computer skill is that I'm very good at 3D visualization, like up here. And that helps with GIS, but it's not a requirement. So, that's something that I've gotten good at computers by nature of being in them and around them and using them for so long, but I don't think of myself as a computer whiz. I just bought a new laptop. I'm like, that needs virus protection, right? There's a lot that you can do. The best maps that I've seen actually come out of the people who have a PR and marketing background or a design background where they know color and how people read and interpret. So yeah, you don't have to be a tech wizard or a computer geek to be good at GIS. Blogs, podcasts, books, or other media. A few, not as many as I would like, because the whole my daughter is 6 thing kind of wiped out my free time for most of the last 6 years. My number one recommended resource is for making pretty maps is Color Brewer. And I can paste the link into the chat. Whole lot of fancy PhD level research behind it. Short version is if you're having trouble trying to get 7 different things to show up pretty on your map and still be distinguishable from one another, go here. That's one of my resources that I would recommend. And there's a map blog. Let me see if it's in the email still. There's a guy who does really wonderful weekly roundups of the different mapping blogs, mapping things. I was not prepared for this question, so now I'm gonna have to find it. I'll see if I can find it and then I'll pass it along. There is one email RSS newsletter that I follow that has everything from the latest atlas being published by the British Museum to the guy doing the Tolkien-esque fantasy maps to, it's a very broad range and it's really fun to read. So I'll find that link. For books, actually, yeah, Color Brewer is awesome. Enjoy. Thinking About GIS by, I'm going to blank on his name, and I've met him and he signed my book, and he just passed away a couple years ago. The father of GIS.
Hey, we use that as a quiz question every semester. Can anyone type it in the chat?
Yeah, somebody type
anyone
that. Know? I'll think of it when the pressure's off, as it were.
There you go.
Tomlinson, thank you. Tomlinson. Right. Roger Tomlinson. Thinking About GIS by Roger Tomlinson. And Jeff, you're the one who knew. Yeah, you're my favorite. Actually, that's a really good book for, as I mentioned, that whole what's the thought process behind it. It's not really software specific. It's very much foundations of GIS that I think would serve almost anybody. So that one's high on my list. If there's anything else, I don't follow any podcasts. People have sent me awesome links. And I never remember them. I'm not very good at auditory media. I don't retain audio information very well. So even when people call me with a work request, I'm typing notes as I go. And then I followed up with an email saying, per our phone conversation, is this what I understand? That's my coping mechanism for not retaining audio information very well, which means I'm not very much for podcasts.
And being busy. I have to do that every time I'm busy just to stay on top of everything.
Spreadsheet of the to-do list.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'll find the one mapping blog that I follow in just a minute, but that's the only other one I've really got. Ways that fire departments and other emergency services use GIS. So I applied for a job at the Office of Emergency Services 6 years ago. And so I got a little bit of a window into what they were doing, but I actually know more about that because my dad was the chief information officer for OES for a large portion of my life before he retired. And I watched him disappear for 12 hours at a time during the Northridge earthquake. And so I learned a little bit about GIS there. And actually, while I had the position at OES when I was a senior in high school, Dave Caroline was one of their lead GIS at the time. He's now a developer at Esri. And I actually met him again, like, I don't know, 6 years ago at an Esri conference, and he remembered me, and it was delightful. A lot of what's being used for emergency services, in fact, I took, and Penn State's got a class on GIS for emergency response, which is awesome. It was my second favorite class, maybe my favorite. And most of it's the real-time data collection and being able to mobilize a response in very short time frame. So there's a lot of planning that goes into that. There's a lot of making sure you have the most up-to-date city data, last year's fire perimeters, where are the power lines. There's a lot of gathering of the infrastructure data ahead of time so that when something hits, you can respond quickly because your data is already there. And so you just collect the new bit and then process from there. There's also a lot of planning that goes into it as far as exercises and running through scenarios and stuff like that. There's things that you make ahead of time, dam break inundation studies. If Shasta Dam breaks, how far does the water go and how fast? I got to work on one of those. The maps are very cool. My house in Sacramento would have been underwater in, what was it, like a week? It takes a while for the water to get that far down, but it does. That's one place. So there's a lot that's done with planning. That's not just the emergency response side of things for fire departments and any other emergency services. The fire department stuff, CAL FIRE's got a really, really sweet GIS setup. If that is an interest of yours, there's a lot to be done there, and they need people every summer. So they do a mobile GIS where they've got a trailer out in the middle of God knows where, tracking fire perimeters and wind speeds, and I don't even know what else. It's been a while since I looked into all those details, but it's pretty cool stuff. I've a long time wanted to do emergency GIS, and again, with the whole now I have a small human, I'm kind of glad I'm not, because all the planning side's awesome. I wouldn't want to be pulled away on 12-hour shifts for response.
We have a lady up here in our neck of the woods who was into that a few years back. That was she. I think she was involved with a company, and that was their main forte. You know, they had the mobile trailer and the GIS and would go to the sites and, you know, set up and do the GIS thing, just like you're talking about there.
Yeah.
It's really interesting stuff. Yeah.
It's awesome. Heroes, people who can do stuff.
Hey, Lexi posted a really good question in the chat there. Do you see it? And where she's speaking about
I do see it. And
scripting.
Unfortunately, I think the answer is probably. I don't like that answer because, as I mentioned, that's a weak point for me. If you don't have the kind of brain that lets you script and program, as I do not, you still need to know what can be done with scripting and programming. And if you have that kind of backup skill, I think you'll probably still be all right, as long as you have someone to work with. But you're probably going to need basic proficiency anyway. As I mentioned, I was trying to do a label expression in Arcade because ArcGIS Online uses that language, and I needed to show the work area name, the construction zone, and the environmental clearance number. And that was from 3 different columns, and that shouldn't have been hard, and it took me an hour. Now I know it, but at the time it's like, what is this language? In ArcGIS Pro, everything is either Python or Arcade. Everything that I used to know about how to set up a label expression in Visual Basic is no longer relevant. So you need some small passing level of familiarity with it, bare minimum, that I'm sure you will need. Whether or not you need to be fluent and able to write Python scripts off the cuff, maybe not. There's a lot of scripting already out there, and if you can kind of read through a script and know what it does, you don't necessarily need to be able to make one. So there's a lot of wiggle room there, but I do think everybody needs some familiarity with it. But that's a really good question. If your brain works that way, go for it. Do the Python scripting. You will be eminently employable for ages.
Sarah, if I could interject a really quick follow-up to that point that you just brought up, which will be nice for students that listen to this podcast session on the Google Earth Engine. And one of the things they just talked about was the fact that you kind of need to be able to script to do it. But this professor who was the featured speaker has this website, GMAP, which is Google Earth Engine, and he sort of creates, well, he calls it a Python package for interactive mapping. And I've started following it, and it's actually pretty cool because it's kind of like that. It's like the, programming for the faint of heart, where he sort of gives you like these little modules and he sort of walks you through it, YouTube videos and stuff. So
nice
to know those kind of resources are out there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm probably going to have to look at that. That's awesome. NACIS. So in the realm of professional organizations, which once you become a working professional, everybody should join at least one. Because of stuff like this, you have this opportunity to interact that is absolutely invaluable. NACIS, North American Cartographic Information Society, does have members in US and Canada. They have one annual meeting in every October from it's like a Wednesday through a Saturday or a Tuesday through a Saturday. And they move it around the country, the continent. And I think it's in Oklahoma this year. They think they can do it in person. Last year it was virtual, but this year they're planning it in Oklahoma. It's a smaller organization, as I mentioned. Their annual meetings run between 300 and 500 max. So it's a smaller group. They're very friendly. There's a lot of good non-ArcGIS specific stuff. I mean, going to the Esri conference is amazing if ArcGIS is your primary software. But if you've got a client who wants QGIS or who wants everything done on the Google Earth Engine and you need to know GeoJSONs, then Esri is not the only conference you need to be going to. So having other resources is useful. And I like NACIS because it's not just Esri focused. And so you get a bigger picture of what else is out there and what else can be done. And besides, they're really nice people.
It's a kind of a nice segue into Lexi's question as well, which is sort of the, Esri products versus, open source or other products that are out there. But it reminds me of something that our new GIO said in a conference that I was at, where he basically said that, if you can learn skills in QGIS or other free and open source, then essentially you're in a position where you can freelance to do your own kind of project work. And the example of the ranch seems like a perfect example of that. So I don't know if, Sarah, that you might want to speak to that sort of question of in relation to Esri products versus the rest of the GIS world.
Lexi kind of hinted at that in the chat too, a little bit further below. You see that there, Sarah?
I did. So Stantec, because they just signed their enterprise agreement with Esri about a year ago, we're actually not allowed to use other products. They've made a couple of special exceptions. I know that the team that we have in New Zealand has been doing QGIS for a very long time, and they've got some sort of exemption going on. Outside of the big companies that can't afford to pay the premium that Esri products cost, QGIS is a really good solution. There's a lot that can be done with it. Is it GRASS is the open source GIS that I tried once upon a time. Map Info, I actually did the state digital geologic map of Hawaii in Map Info. That wasn't in ARC. And switching between the softwares wasn't that bad. So Dan's point is very valid. If you can learn the skills in pick a software, you can apply them in almost all the others. And that's actually, to me, that's actually the downfall of switching to ArcGIS Pro. I know the skills, it's how to do it in that particular software. And I keep expecting it to be the same because it's an Esri product and it's not the same. And that's my own, got to get past it, mental block. But yeah, you can learn the skills in another software and then apply them. To address the ranch question again, that's also the kind of thing you could do as an internship, as a master's project. There's ways around that. that might help. Let's see, pretty maps. I have not actually tried to do this exact thing in Pro in the last 2 years, but trying to get an oblique angle view, which is something that Pro does that ArcMap does not, and get labels on the oblique angle and also have the plan view next to it and have everything line up, didn't work the last time I tried it. And I'll confess, I haven't tried it in the last 2 years. They might have finally fixed that. There's a lot of finagling of legends and layers, some of which is better in Pro. Pro is better at doing the transparency around the text to make the text stand out better. And I'm looking forward to playing with that. And you can't do that in ArcMap. But at this point, my understanding is that Pro can do almost everything ArcMap can do as far as pretty map layouts. And it's really just me needing to finish learning it. So I don't have a specific answer to that question, but you're pushing me to go do it.
I think a lot of us are in the same boat with still needing to learn more about Pro anyway. I know I am.
I think it's interesting that, you know, as professionals, it's almost harder for us to come from 20 years of experience and make a transition like that. And, you know, it almost puts students in a better position now to sort of start fresh, because we're kind of seeing the transition. And as you mentioned, Sarah, you know, something it didn't do well a year ago, it might do well in this latest version release, but it's hard to kind of step through those barriers and then wait until they're no longer barriers, and you just want to go back to your other software that you know and you can use. So for those students out there, you know, I think it's a good lesson, and this is a great time to get into GIS, and if you can just learn it from the beginning, you kind of put yourself in a good position to use all of its latest capabilities.
Yeah, that will serve you well. I agree.
Well, we are coming up on the 7 o'clock time here, and Sarah, we can't thank you enough for making time for us. And
thank you for having me. This was delightful.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Great.
Yeah,